Great. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, I have Andrea Darabos from the UK, actually from Hungary, but living in the UK. And also Stefan Morales. And Stefan, you're in Canada. So in Edmonton, Canada. So welcome both of you. We are going to dive into Async and everything that Async is about. But let's start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like? And what do you need to get your work done? Andrea, I'll start with you.
Thank you for the lovely, curious question. We love to be here, Lisette. I'm a long-time follower of your work and your community at Collaboration Superpowers, and this is a great podcast. My office, first of all, is a moving office because you may find me in London, in Budapest, and occasionally in other locations. I've embraced the opportunity to work from anywhere as long as I can bridge the time zones for our clients. But normally my essential equipment for working from anywhere is a standing desk, actually. And I discovered that with the lots of travel that I do like to still return to places. So even though I travel, I tend to have a fixed co-working space or a flat or an office or even a friend's place where I return. And recently I discovered a cardboard standing desk, which is surprisingly sturdy, which can be folded up, and I pack it in the corner. And when I'm visiting, for example, Budapest, I have a standing desk to work from. So that's my essential, and that's my usual setup, Lisette.
Oh, I love it. A standing desk. That's something that's become more and more popular with remote workers or just workers all over the world, as we've all just discovered we're sitting too much, like way too much. So I love that. All right, Stefan, what does your virtual office look like?
Yeah, for me, it's basically whenever I have my laptop, so it can be anywhere. I guess, maybe that's stereotypical in a lot of ways, but I quite like that. I do have many desks in my house though. So my wife and I, we've got a bunch of desks all around the place. So we have different spaces where we move to for different reasons. Right now, for instance, I'm in my basement on my basement desk because this is like the most removed part of my house. And so it's a good place to do quiet work or to have meetings where I need quiet. But yeah, I like to think of my my laptop as my temporary autonomous office, my DAO. And my DAO, it changes depending on where I'm at with my work. So if I need to be thinking and ruminating on some thoughts, I might actually intentionally try to schedule in a walk to a cafe or to the co-working space and use that time to kind of think a bit. And then when I'm there, I'm doing the work or I'm having the meeting. Yeah, so my office can be anywhere. It can be a kitchen table. It can be one of these desks. It can be out in the city somewhere.
Well, I think that's one of the best parts of this modern way of working is that we can change our workspace depending on the task. I mean, that was always sort of one of the promises of remote work, is that going to the same place every single day isn't necessarily good for creativity, right? So being able to move around is stand and move to a cafe or a desk is awesome. And it kind of takes us right into our topic for today, which is async. And one of the things that really drew me to wanting to interview what you guys are doing is because one, your posts on LinkedIn were very interesting. We're going to talk about your Async Manifesto in just a second. But one of the things you say is, while location flexibility is important, we believe there is a much bigger opportunity to upgrade our work processes and practices based on intelligent, autonomous employee choices. And you say that Async is about resetting how your team collaborates. So let me just ask then, why did you decide to start Async? And why is it such a problem how we're currently collaborating?
Thank you. It's an awesome question, and I cannot resist to, I have to give the honest answer that this project on my side was really, it grew from a frustration or an experience of working with my clients, typically digital remote working teams, product teams, or service design teams, around the globe who went into a meeting overhead or a meeting by design, or meeting as the first option of choice when they were collaborating. We have to be aware that obviously the pandemic times influenced this. It was the time where we all experienced high anxiety, we felt isolated, and yes, we had a desire to meet. But as the world is normalizing and we are back to, perhaps lower anxiety levels, there are new reasons to worry, of course, but our health is less at risk. I would like to help teams to consider other choices. So when Tomomi and Stefan, we met through actually a self-management program called Liberating Structures, which gives teams the choice to design their real-time interactions. I had this idea or inspiration to not only give people and teams choices on real-time collaboration patterns, but also in non-real-time or alternative choices on how they use their time. So we definitely see the world and companies focusing on location flexibility indeed, but we do believe that that's a suboptimal question. While important, the work environment should be something we consider and actively choose. Even more important is how we spend our workday. And for some people, the 9-to-5 pattern is not suitable anymore. So really looking at the entire day where we could integrate our life and work better and really make choices about our 24 hours in a day.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
So Stefan, did you want to
Stefan,
add to that?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, Andrea and Tomomi and I, we're always nerding out on this. But I think the provocative kind of question that we're asking, or maybe before the provocative question, is like suggesting that we might be asking the wrong question when we're asking about location, that this is actually maybe the wrong way into this conversation, right? It's like, it's not about remote only or office only, especially, like there's not this polarity. It's really more this question about how we're designing our time, and how do we do that with intention? It's so funny. I think our provocative question is like, okay, if time is so important to us, we have all of these sayings, time is money, it's this non-renewable resource that we have. If it's so darn important, then why aren't we more intentionally designing it? Why aren't we more intentionally thinking about how we use our time effectively to collaborate, to do deep work, to do all of the things that we need to do in a day in a way that's balanced and that recognizes the fact that we're humans and that we have, specific human needs, desires, physical body needs, all of these things, right? And so our question is like, okay, if it's so important, then why aren't we treating it as such? And this is really a lot of the work around Async, is like thinking about, okay, if we're now intentionally designing it, what does that look like? What are the different patterns? And in a way, you could almost see it as like, it's like the early foundations of what you could think of as being a critical role in the future of work or the present of work, which is like a head of remote or like a head of, interaction or collaboration design or something. We don't really have this sort of role in many of the organizations that we work within. And why?
I think it's just so new. And a lot of people thought that remote and virtual working was really easy. Like we have the images of pajama bottoms and umbrella drinks on the beach, right? Which is a terrible place to work anyway. Like anybody that's worked for the beach knows it's just not viable. But when it really came down to it, we found out that actually remote work was just work in a different place. And it's still just as hard as it was in the office. So I love where you're coming from. So you're saying that this async really came from the meeting overload that people were experiencing when we took all of our processes in person and went online. Like we just ended up in endless online calls. And so since time is such a precious resource, why are we doing this to ourselves? Like knowing that it's not healthy and it's not productive, why are we doing this? So it sounds like your answer to this is the Async Manifesto, where you've come up with these sort of 6 skill domains for distributed teams. And I would really love to talk through these because I think they're critical for working in this new way. If you want to find a sustainable way of working, I think that the Async Manifesto is kind of the one place to look. So I'd love to hear you explain the Async Manifesto, how you came up with it, and then tell us what's in it.
I will start with, maybe we do a 2 by 2 by 2.
Yeah.
I will start with the origin story. If listeners, as you are listening, if you get to know us in the future, you will find that we quite like detail, and we also like games. So the way we looked at tackling this problem of how to design for time was actually going into some small games or gamified practices, which would be easy to do and would take maybe like really small effort to memorize or remember, but would be fun to do to help teams situationally design their time. So the first thing that we put into the manifesto is that we envision to be able to give you, and we are already publishing these small games, so small async practice cards, where you can sit down with a handful of cards and think about, okay, I would like to achieve the outcome of generating bold ideas around this problem with my team. But what if we don't have time? Or what if we are around the globe and we have, we can meet for 1 hour per day? Will it be enough? What would be alternatives to consider? So the first step in our manifesto is to actually think about how we could achieve idea generation without the need to meet. How would we store the ideas? Would it be on the chat or maybe visually? How would we encourage people to comment on existing other ideas? Like in a brainstorming session, we often get ideas by looking at others. What prompts would there need to be? Some minimum prompts to inspire people, like in design thinking, when we brainstorm, we say, think about extreme users. So once we give you these little hints or these games that you can play, we would like to encourage our community to experiment with these practice cards. Some might work in your context and others not. Really, our vision is to help you take time to experiment and think about your use of time, and consider a non-meeting alternative, a non-Zoom call or Teams call alternative to that. Stefan, maybe you want to pick up some other elements.
Yeah, I think, there's the no meeting side of it. And I think that a big part of it too is in our name, we have this A/sync. So this is intentional. This is really us trying to bring attention to the fact that it's the interaction between these two spaces and your purpose that is really the space of fruitful design interventions that you can have at work. And as Andrea is saying with these practice cards, the practice cards are like our little mini patterns that we're kind of just, we ourselves are collecting, working on, experimenting with. We've tried in other settings, so on and so forth. And we're kind of packaging them up in this very straightforward way that someone can kind of look at that and go, okay, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try to put this into practice. And the manifesto side of things is kind of like our big container for all of those practice cards. So within we have 6 different skill domains in that, and I'll just run them off, and then Andrea and we can kind of go back and forth into them. But we have take time to design our time, right? So here it's about designing for variation in whether, when, and how we meet and collaborate. Then we have document and collaborate, async. So being explicit here about like thinking about the async as a space of documentation to make it more visible, make our work more visible outside of meetings. Choosing when and how to be productive. So we work with the energy and attention of each individual, and give ourselves the autonomy to choose that, right? Making commitments and decisions together is our 4th piece. And this is really, it's about building shared trust and transparency, reflecting, learning, and playing, which is all about this, human, playful, the side of things that leads to creativity and to innovation and all of that good stuff. And prioritizing our well-being and belonging, because we're human. We're squishy humans who need rest, need social connection, all of these things. So at a high level, that's kind of like the 6 skill domains. And within each of those, we have these little practice cards that show up as invitations to anyone to go and practice it and try it out in their setting.
And where would you start? Like, say, for instance, I'm coming to you and I am completely overloaded. I've got 20 plus hours a week of meetings that I know I don't need, but I don't know where to start. Where would you have me start if I were a new person coming in?
So what we are building in public, Lizette. So if you go to our website, letsworkasync.com, you will be able to actually download this manifesto. And we are also making available an online canvas on a mural, which is an asynchronous reflection space. So when you open that, you will see these 6 domains. And if you are experiencing high levels of stress and similar frustration, what I felt when we started this project, you feel that you are overloaded, that you don't feel in control of your time, we would like to invite you to actually block out some time in your calendar before it gets filled up. Block out half an hour and use the time for reflection. So reflection is quiet time, thinking time. You may want to go on a walk and think about the 6 domains, or you may want to actually write or put some stickers on this canvas. And the first step for you would be to think about the 6 domains. So there are prompts on the canvas, and to say, do I actually take the time today in my work or in a typical work day? Doesn't matter when, but do I take the action to look at my plan for today, to think about my number 1 priority, to decide which ways of interaction today need to be a meeting, and perhaps decline or counter-propose interactions which could be solved better by non-real-time interaction. So that's the first domain, and reflect firstly how well you do these 6 practices or these manifesto areas would be my first tip for everyone to do.
Oh, I love it. And then, oh, sorry, Stefan, go ahead.
No, I would just second everything that Andrea said. I think that's, yeah.
And in the materials you sent me before this interview, it's sort of a spider diagram of the 6 skill areas. And I do like the idea of doing a quick assessment on the spider diagram for yourself, and just seeing like which area do you rate yourself the lowest in, and then start there. Like, that's just a great way to start, right? Like, just pick, you're going to have to do something in all areas, most likely. Nobody's perfect, but the areas you rate yourself lowest in. So these are really great. What happens though if there's one person on the team, it's like, okay, I'm done with all the meetings, but the rest of the team, they're fine with all the meetings. How do you convince your team to go async?
Yes. So I recently gave a talk on Lean Agile London. This was the first time we opened up the content or our vision to the community. We had 200 participants.
Oh.
All right. So Andrea cut out unexpectedly. We'll wait for her to come back, but Stefan, you're going to field the question. So how do I convince my team to have less meetings?
Yeah, this is a hard one in many ways, but I think it becomes easy if we focus on the data, focus on what is actually happening. And so, my suggestion for a group of folks would be to use this lovely liberating structure called What, So What, Now What, which is a retrospective tool. So I'm going right to the pragmatic thing. Get your team together and have them work through what, so what, now what. And the way that works is that you start with what's the factual thing that's happening. And so in this case, it's like you're looking at how many meetings are you having back to back. You're getting that sense of just the facts. What is happening here, right? And you're really holding yourself to stick to the facts in the what part. We meet on average, 24 hours out of the week or something insane like this, right? And then you move up to the next step, to the so what, which is, okay, so what does this mean? What is this data telling us? And so here's where we can start to layer in the meaning, where people, you can hear different voices from the group saying, okay, well, this for me, so what does this mean? It means that I'm usually getting home very late because I have to do all of my desk work after the meetings or whatever, right? So that can emerge in the so what. And then you move to the now what. And the now what piece is, okay, what do we do about this? And this is where we start to see, like, okay, the practice cards that we're offering through Async as a good entry point into thinking about that now what. Okay, now what do we do about changing? Well, here's some suggestions that we have. So yeah, I'm coming at it from this very, like, here's what you could do, like in your next team meeting, you could host a what, so what, now what for 30 minutes. And really kind of get to the bottom of this on that topic of, how much we're meeting, what our meeting frequency looks like. And Andrea, welcome back. We lost you.
Lost for a second. So Stefan answered the question, like, how do we convince our team to go further? And actually, Stefan, on maybe that Andrea's lost again. We'll see. She looks awfully frozen, so we'll see. But to speak to your point, one of the things that I did on my team is that we had these meetings every Monday morning at around 10 a.m. And it turns out that in one of our retrospectives, somebody brought up, like, well, I love our team, but man, starting out Monday morning with a meeting straight first thing is so rough. Like, it doesn't give us pleasure. So the team just decided, well, okay, well, what could we do to give our working life add a little more pleasure into our working life, right? And then, so we just moved the meetings to Tuesday, and it improved everything. So it's one of these, it was a really easy problem to solve, but I think every team can kind of go through a little retrospective of, all right, so this is what I consider to be the issue. And you may find that your team doesn't consider it an issue at all. Like maybe 24 hours a week of meetings is something that your whole team thinks is okay. That's that would also be interesting information to have. I'll bet that that's not going to be the case. Nobody wants to meet that often every week. So it's good. So I like this. So it's how did you say it again? The which liberating structure did you use?
What, so what, now what?
What, so what, and now what? I love it. So I love that you're coming at it from this tangible point of view. Andrea, are you back? We shall see. Okay, we shall see.
Oh no, we lost her.
So then moving on for this. So Stefan, what were you seeing in teams? Why do you think that teams aren't doing this already, right? Like we're 2.5 years into the pandemic. We're still in all these meetings and we're still doing it. Like, even though that we know that they're not great, why do you think that we're not naturally making this change and that we're sort of just barreling through?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'd be so curious what Andrea would say about this too. I wish she was here. I think from my end, a big why around this is, Cal Newport, his work. So he's got this recent book on email, and he calls it the hyperactive hive mind. That all of this communication that we're stuck in, right? We're kind of overly communicating with one another. And one of the interesting things in his book that he looks at is IBM's adoption of email in the early days, and their original estimation of how much they would need to have that tool handle. So they were looking at their server capacity and trying to figure out how many servers they would need to handle all this communication. And they were just looking at pre-existing communication. So they thought, okay, this is just going to migrate over to email. And their estimations were way off. It was like they had to, they were thinking they would need this much capacity. They actually needed 6 times that amount. So there's something interesting that has happened in our workplaces over the past few decades, I think, where communication, the need for meetings, the amount of emails, all of this sheer amount of coordination is just so large. It's so intense as well, that we're kind of stuck in this quote unquote hyperactive hive mind of checking messages, being in calls, just always being in coordination and communication mode with our colleagues or our collaborators. And we actually need to intentionally kind of step out of that for a moment. So as Andrea was suggesting a few moments ago, of kind of just even taking 30 minutes to begin to reflect on this, right? To reflect on our manifesto and to begin to think about, okay, how might I bring in one of these simple little practice cards into my context is the first step. It has to start with just this little wedge that squeezes into that sea of over communication so that we can start to think, oh, maybe I don't need to be plugged into that all day long, all the time. Maybe I can be intentional about some boundaries that I'm making in my day for me to get some deep work done, or for me to co-work with peers silently, or for us to meet with intention and kind of design the meeting, right? In a way that we get participation and engagement from everyone in the room, rather than, for instance, just a status update or a boss kind of downloading on the team. So these are the kind of future practices, and getting us out of this thick, hyperactive hive mind space of communication, constant communication. Just requires, as Andrea is saying, just 30 minutes. Schedule it in your calendar. Use that time to just reflect on this and begin to think about what can happen differently.
I love that. And I'm a huge fan of Cal Newport and his latest book, A World Without Email. I thought it was a genius book, sort of the manifesto to the modern way of working in a way, because he says that we didn't choose email as the primary way of collaborating. Email chose us because it's so easy to use. And then now it's not just email, it's email and Slack and Teams and WhatsApp and LinkedIn and Twitter. I mean, I myself, I'm a tech junkie and I cannot keep up with all the messages that I get on all the platforms. I simply I don't have I see them, but I don't have the brain space, the capacity in my head to actually fully respond. And sometimes my friends will wait a week on WhatsApp because I just don't have the mental capacity. And it's, I'm not rare. You're all shaking your heads like you understand. So I just feel like, how do people keep up all the time? And agreed, like we can't keep up with the hyperactive hive mind. That's the thing. Like at one point, we're just playing ping pong on too many tables is really sort of Cal's argument. So Andrea, the question that I posed to Stefan is, why are teams still doing this? After 2.5 years of being in the hyperactive hive mind intensely, why are we not naturally finding a way out?
There is an amazing recent conversation on this question in actually the remote working community. Experts of remote working are flagging up that ultimately there is a huge culture of presenteeism still in many organizations, even in remote first organizations. And GitLab and Datalog just recently did a study of remote first organizations practices and presenteeism, and they found a correlation between the current observable behaviors and potentially the pressure of how people feel, that unless we show that we are busy, unless we show the green button on Slack or on Teams or the tools we use that we are online, we have in many organizations the feeling that what will other colleagues think, what will our managers think if we are offline and not reachable. So to develop this psychological safety, there is a big flashing sign of trust, that we have to trust each other. When people are batching their time, and it is one of the practices we recommend, when they are choosing to be productive by disconnecting, by saying, yes, I will have some reachable response time. Every day I will batch my emails and my chat messages, but I will do it twice a day. And I'm in control of that time because I need that to be productive. That's choosing to reduce that noise of being reachable, being online. And that requires trust.
Trust and discipline from ourselves. That's the other thing that I think people didn't recognize so much about remote work, is the amount of self-discipline that it takes to just design your day and then follow that design. Because I mean, anybody that's tried losing weight knows you can say we can eat less and move more, but it's not as easy as that, right? And the same is true with asynchronous versus synchronous. We can say like, let's meet less, but that's just not as easy as that. Like there's a whole workflow that needs to be redesigned in order to move into this space. So I want to dive into leadership for a little bit because you brought up the idea of trust on a team. And I feel that the virtual team leaders or hybrid team leaders in this sense have a huge role to play in this sphere. And so I just want to ask, I guess, Andrea, I'll start with you. In terms of leadership, what makes a good virtual leader, in your opinion?
Yes. So we need to role model the practices and the behaviors we want to see in our teams. So, we are hugely responsible as a leader in how we show up. If we would like our organization to prioritize well-being, not only productivity, then how about starting with ourselves? Because if we don't prioritize our well-being, if we don't switch off, if we work limitless hours and limitless effort, then we will set the expectation, even unwillingly, by our behavior. In fact, we are developing two development programs or experiential labs, and effectively we have the hunch that leaders do have a lot of questions around remote working, which they are not yet feeling safe to ask or discuss with their own teams. Because if they would ask these basic questions sometimes, then they feel too vulnerable or looking stupid or maybe setting the wrong expectations. So we are developing a program specifically for leaders where they can discuss with their peers or other managers on how do I deal with the problem of not driving my team into a burnout zone. How do I set the right level of expectations in terms of workload, outcomes? How do I get feedback on that? What are ways to observe that? So it's very important to work with peers. Don't do this job alone as a leader. So another quality of or good behavior of a distributed leader is continue to network and connect with other managers who are leading in this remote or hybrid async environment and experiment from each other.
I love the answer of role modeling the behavior, because there's so many leaders out there saying like, yeah, pay attention to your well-being, and then working 80-hour weeks themselves, right? Like, and if your leader's working that much, there's no way that you as an employee are going to feel safe with like, I'm going to take Friday off for my well-being, right? That's just not how it happens. So Stefan, what do you think makes a good virtual leader?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Andrea said there is totally on point. And I think to tie it back into these kind of interventions that we can be making, your question, how do we get the whole team on board, and what makes a good leader in this space? There's a linkage there, right? So in what I was outlining with what now what is a good example of doing that. There's a reason why that's good use of synchronous time, right? We're getting the team. So if you're the leader and you're facilitating that, you're getting the team's fingerprints on whatever agreement you're going to develop together around how you work together, right? So you get that through these sorts of structures and practices that intentionally distribute participation and control. And in that way, not only do people kind of collectively witness what everyone is thinking and what everyone is feeling about a topic, right? But you're building trust, because now people see, okay, we've kind of built this together. And so the next step after something like that for a virtual leader to take would be to you just ask a simple question of the group. What are our expectations of ourselves and each other as we, transition into a different mode of working, as we try to work more intentionally with our time? And from that, you have the foundation for building a team agreement, which again, like this is another moment where we can all trust in one another, that we basically agree with what we're saying in terms of our expectations of ourselves and each other's. And this is the way a virtual leader can kind of bring everyone along very intentionally into a different way of working, a different way of thinking about how we collaborate, that gives the team their autonomy. So I think for me, a big part about a virtual leader, whether you're in a conventional organization or you're in a flatter organization, is finding ways to give ourselves the autonomy and the trust in one another to do the work that we need to do in the way that works best for us, because it's different for every person.
And there's a huge gap here. I think it's very difficult for us as leaders to trust that people are going to come through like we think that they're going to come through. I guess that's where all these conversations come in. As a team, we need to decide what the expectations are going to be so that everybody has a clear view of what success looks like. And I know we're getting to the end of the time, but I still have a couple of questions. So I promise we'll end on time, but I'm curious about your own productivity hacks since the pandemic has started, sort of your own way that work has changed. Because obviously, since you're starting this company, Async, your own work practices, I'm sure, have gone more async. So Stefan, I'll start with you this time. What has changed in your own work practices since the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I can still remember when that started and kind of the nervousness of like suddenly transitioning into this much more digital space. I had been collaborating at that point quite a bit with folks in person. So working with friends of mine on different projects that were happening in the city of Vancouver, where I was at the time. And so in transitioning into this more virtual remote space, I found myself beginning to step more deeply into this hyperactive hive mind space, right? And begin to feel like a little overwhelmed by the sheer amount of communication that was happening in Slack and and the sheer amount of Zoom calls that were happening and this sort of thing. And I had experienced burnout many years before when I used to work in government. And so I was very nervous about something like that happening again. And so I started to think about something that a concept I've been playing with quite a bit that I call anti-productivity. So it's basically, or maybe a more gentler way of putting it is adjacent productivity. So what are the things that are adjacent to your productivity that we often don't think about in that narrative, because we're stuck on like self-discipline and getting things done and all of this, right? But you can't actually enter that mindset and that kind of embodied space of getting things done and doing this unless you're prioritizing your well-being and thinking about the ways in which a balanced life, balanced activities plays into that. And so for me, it's about thinking about what you can stop doing. This is the anti-productivity lens. Is like coming at it first from a values framework, from a lens of like, what do I need? What does my body need? What does my health need? Coming from that first, to then look at your workflow, whatever you're doing, right? And begin interrogating where you can stop doing things and where you can introduce, things like exercise and things like this that can help you come into that space of productivity with a clearer mind. So that's a big part of my practice.
I love it. And Andrea?
Yeah, I will refer to another source here. I read an article, and it's often quoted by Paul Graham from Y Combinator. His post on maker time versus manager time. And in my role as a coach, consultant, trainer, I often find myself in manager time because either we are working in a team to set up a training or prepare for it, or we are actually delivering it, often in a team. So it's very much managing a team and managing towards an outcome. That's my schedule, and having some sales or customer calls. And then in the remaining time, I found myself growing a frustration or a need, a desire to actually have a block of time which is uninterrupted and make things. So I found myself, experimenting with this balance. What works for me is having at least 2 days per week where I block out half a day, ideally 3 hours uninterrupted, turn off all notifications and create something and then launch it at the end of the time. Also share it with a friend, with one colleague, or share it with the world, but make something that can hopefully help someone. Cook food for a friend is also a nice adjacent practice, but it can be also work related. So this has really worked for me.
I love it. And I think that, we can all go out. I think productivity is so personal. There's no one right way. It's a matter of experimenting and figuring out what's going to work for you. And the thing with this, what we know is that it's always changing, right? Our work practices are going to evolve over time. So it's a matter of just having that experimental mindset from here on forward, right? Like it's just a new way of being. So I love what you guys are doing. Sadly, we're out of time. I can't believe it already. I have so many more questions that I wanted to ask, but I'll end with the final question, which is if people want to learn more about you and Async, where should they go? Andrea, give us the website for Async again.
Yes, the website is our entry point where you can find out more about us and the project primarily and download some goodies like the practice cards or the reflection canvas. It's the Let's Work Async without the H at the end, so ending with the C, letsworkasync.com. You can also find the A/sync on LinkedIn. On our LinkedIn page, we are posting a lot and we are really open for feedback, ideas, suggestions. Please share with us what you are struggling with, what you are needing, because we are a team who builds in public. We are far from, perfect. We are just here to give some nudges, some games, some inspiration, and work with the community to figure things out around remote collaboration.
Love it. All right. And Stefan, where can we find you online?
Oh, the same space. Let's send everyone to letsworkasync.com. And just to jump on to what Andrea was saying there too, like great to hear feedback, but also like, what are you trying? I think this is a curiosity that we have is what else is going on in this space? What are other people trying? So yeah, share your experiments and your experiences.
Yeah, especially if they're failed experiments. Those tend to be the most interesting.
Juicy.
So if you did an experiment and it blew up, yeah, bring it on. That's what we want to hear about. Also, the success stories are great too, of course. So thank you both so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And until next time, everybody, be powerful.